Welcome everybody to this dialogue series, the GEO Dialogue series. Today we will cover the diversity of knowledge. My name is Bente Liljaby. I'm going to be your host today and also introduce the focus area this time. This dialogue series is operated or organized by the GEO Data Working Group, and especially Marie-Françoise Vadreau and myself. And Marie-Françoise is with us here. You can see she's in an area where it's not so easy to be hosting. And hello, Marie-Françoise.
Hello, everyone. And yes, apologies not to support more, but I would be there listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Françoise, for doing that. So today's program, I will share today's program and introduce the topic. Just hold on a little bit. So a few words about myself. I have been in the GEO family for many, many years from the very beginning, and have been in various roles, participating in the plenary, being in the program board, and now I'm a very enthusiastic a member of the GEO Data Working Group. I work with data management. Data sharing principles are very close to my heart, and I do everything I can to make all the communities from many different disciplines use Earth observations. Some house rules before we really start is that we keep our microphones off when we are not speaking. We do welcome you to ask questions and comment in the chat, both during the presentations and also, of course, when we are entering into the discussion part of the dialogue. Raise your hand if you want to speak. We encourage this because we want to create this community where we get to know each other a little bit and really have a dialogue from human to human. So raising your hand will be taking place when we are at the discussion part of the program. Other than that, enjoy this GEO Dialogue series. And we have a very, very exciting panel of speakers, of excellent experts and representatives of the indigenous community. We will start first, though, with introducing the topic of the day. Then we will get also an overview and an introduction to the GEO Indigenous Alliance. Before we have three different perspectives on indigenous knowledge from experts here. The first one will be on indigenous knowledge in Earth observations, key concepts and frequent misconceptions by Yolanda Lopez Maldonado. And then we will go to another continent, indigenous knowledge for climate action and a Samburu perspective by Titus Letapo. And last but not least, from ancestral wisdom to digital frontiers, the role of indigenous technologies by Alejandro Marroyal. So, and then finally a discussion. So that's the program for today. And I will then change presentation and introduce you to the topic of the day. So this dialogue series is dedicated, as the whole series is dedicated to the GEO Open Knowledge Statement. And we start then with a definition of open knowledge, and the starting point is a definition by the Open Knowledge Foundation. Open knowledge is any content, information, or data that people are free to use, reuse, and redistribute without any legal, technological, or social restriction. Now, the GEO Knowledge Statement has been or is an adaptation to the GEO community. And this is what we have developed and are going through. So the proposed principles and methodologies is the subject of these dialogues. It started in GEO in 2019. It was first a statement really on open science as a part of the strategy for a result-oriented GEOs and the GEO Knowledge Hub, and we will come back to the GEO Knowledge Hub. It was drafted by or led by Marcus Konkol. He was here at the last dialogue, and other members of the Capacity Development Working Group. And the reason for this was that it is super important for open science to capacity building, particularly in developing countries. And after some revisions and iterations I remember I said it needed to be adapted to the GEO community, the statement was revised and become what we now know as the Open Knowledge Statement. And open knowledge, while inclusive of open science, of course, is considered to be more closely aligned with the GEO mission and vision, which aim to support decision-making and not only or primarily science. So it's a little bit more than that. And this statement provides a rationale and impetus for the open context of activities in the GEO work program and the GEO community, and the results of which will then be made accessible through the GEO Knowledge Hub. So we translated then these open knowledge statements and the input that came from the community into these 11 principles. And you see it's open science, of course, open access, citizens and participatory science, open data, this is core to GEO, open reproducible research, open software, open infrastructure, open hardware, open education, and open evaluation, and today's topic, diversity of knowledge. Up until now, we have actually covered all of these 9 principles, and we are excited that we are finally here to cover the diversity of knowledge. And you see here the program. And we have arrived at the 6th of October, so we are almost done for this year. We will summarize this and present it at the GEO plenary in one of the working groups there, and align it or join it with the ODOC, the Open Data, Open Knowledge workshop results that we had a few weeks ago. So, diversity of knowledge. This is actually what is written in the open knowledge statement in GEO. And we decided it should goes as the diversity of knowledge systems, holders and producers should also be recognized in the production of open knowledge. These considerations require acknowledging the rights of indigenous people and the principles of non-discrimination based on income, gender, age, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, and geographical location. Weaving cultural knowledge bases together can maintain the validity and the integrity of all methodologies and world views. So this is very nice, a very nice concept and idea. And today, I think we will then we will see how this can be or are being implemented into real implementations. So that was the introduction of the topic. Let me see, and I go back to the program, because now I mentioned you saw here in the text that we are referring to the indigenous communities. And in fact, we created GEO Indigenous Alliance, and one of the founders is Titus. And I will introduce you, Titus. And all of these slides are being shared on the GEO Knowledge Hub after the events. And you can get the whole knowledge package of all the different dialogues that we have had together there. So you can also then read about Titus Letapo. He's a founding member of the GEO Indigenous Alliance. So I'm very happy to have you here today. And he is a champion of the community conservation model in northern Kenya, with over 19 years of conservation and community development. And he is now supporting Namuniac Wildlife Community Conservancy as a director of community and programs of the Sahara Foundation. And we will hear more about what he actually doing there afterwards. But now, Titus, I would like to give you the floor so that you can tell us the story about the GEO Indigenous Alliance.
Yeah, thank you, Betty, and hello, everybody. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing your name well. Betty.
Bente is good.
B. Is it the right pronunciation?
Yes, very good.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just maybe to give a little brief on the GEO Indigenous Alliance. It was founded in 2019 in Canberra Ministerial Summit by Indigenous representatives who are attending that summit by then, with an aim to protect and conserve Indigenous cultural heritage by using Earth observation, science, data and technology to create knowledge-based data that can sustain the Earth that we live on. You'll find that as Indigenous people, we feel that we are part of the Earth, and we have the responsibility to protect it and also make sure that it's a better place to live in. And that's why we formed the GEO Indigenous Alliance. And we thank GEO for giving us that opportunity to be part of that. We had founder members from Australia. We had some from Siagu Lakatu community in America. Then we also had Diana, who is currently like our international strategic person. Marius Fagas, who is from Shuar Nation, Ecuadorian Amazon, and also some of the members who are also there. So we formed the alliance just to make sure that the voices of the indigenous communities maybe are also included within GEO Earth observation data, and also making sure that the data sovereignty of the indigenous communities are also taken care of. As an alliance, we had so many activities. We had an hackathon in 2020, basically trying to understand the challenges the indigenous communities are facing in terms of accessibility to data, and also how they can also interpret the data. And we had several presentations, communities maybe presenting their challenges. And we are so happy because even the world and even other non-indigenous communities who are trying to support the indigenous communities to solve their problems. We have some working groups with the disaster risk assessment and management. We also have activities in climate action, indigenous people sovereignty. We also have some on women empowerment program, given the fact that in most indigenous communities, women are undermined. They are not given space, or maybe their voices are not being heard. So as an indigenous alliance, we also take a responsibility to ensure that voices of women and youth also come out to be heard. And also we understand that transfer of knowledge is very important and critical, because in our societies, you find women who are also considered as people who can interpret the future, who can look at the stars, look at maybe Earth, or even heavenly bodies, and even can predict. So we needed to make sure the youth and women also we have that knowledge transfer from older generation to younger generation, so that we maintain and also linking it with the current science. So we also have women empowerment as that. And currently we are also looking at trying to make sure that all indigenous communities across the world participate in our alliance. We already have a strategy in making sure that we reach out to everybody to try and capture what they intend to do. But basically, our main focus within the GEO is to ensure that indigenous communities' voices or even knowledge captured within the GEO platform, because most of the indigenous communities are considered, let's say, people who don't have knowledge, but they have been surviving, and even the areas they live in are critical ecosystems or maybe landscapes that even the world depends on, and they have been having their own ways of dealing with the climate change actions, or maybe even looking at the maybe calamities when they come and how they can address it. So we want to see the indigenous community being resilient to challenges being brought by climate change. So in a nutshell, that's what we are. We are still a young organization that is trying to come up, and personally, and even the whole group is appreciate the space that we are given by GEO to make sure that we are able to work with our indigenous communities across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Titus, for that deeper introduction to indigenous, the Indigenous Alliance. Indeed, in order to solve all of the challenges we have, we need all types of knowledge and data, and it's very good to have this group organizing this. To help integrate that particular body of, and however diverse that is in itself, by the way, into our pool of data and knowledge. So that is great. And you will tell the story about how you're working on that related to climate change afterwards. But now we are going to introduce Yolanda Lopez Maldonado. Sorry, sorry if I'm killing your name there, Yolanda. I will share my screen so that people can read a little bit about you and see. You have a very impressive background also, and you are a Maya woman from Mexico and a science diplomat. Working on understanding the social dimensions of nature conservation, and with robust knowledge in the promotion and defense of the diversity of ideas. So right up our alley here. And you work in many different, it looks like you have a very multidisciplinary background and experience, and even some links to the Nordic countries, to Scandinavia. I see you are have a scholarship or have been involved in from the Royal Swedish Academy of Science. So this is, I will just take that as I am Norwegian, so this is our neighbor. Very, very impressive, Yolanda, and we are very interested in hearing what you have to say also. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lilia. I think we can start right away. So I will ask my friend Alejandro Mayoral to share my PowerPoint. Well, today I will speak a little bit about indigenous knowledge in Earth observations, and I will bring some important concepts in relation to our indigenous knowledge, and also some frequent misconceptions for those that are unfamiliar with our knowledge. So I hope you can listen my voice. So if all is good, we can continue to the next slide, please, Alexander. Well, about indigenous peoples, I bring just some important facts. Indigenous peoples are located in over 90 countries across all continents, They manage over a quarter of the world land surface. They protect almost 80% of the most important biodiverse areas around the world, but represent only 6% of the world's population. Indigenous peoples, they also have deep spiritual connection to nature and a precise knowledge of the natural world. And this map was published a couple of years ago, in which shows the total lands managed by indigenous peoples or controlled by indigenous peoples globally. Next slide, please. So the first myth I would like to bring here is that indigenous knowledge is similar to other knowledge systems, including Western or technical or local, etc. The reality is that indigenous peoples confer prominence and superiority to the natural world and the relationship with nature. And this can be seen in concepts that are used by indigenous groups around the world. For example, with perspectives like the good quality of life, the right of living in balance, or summa causa or buen vivir. And there are specific and very particular characteristics when we compare indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. I'm not saying both are the opposite, but they have important differences. Next slide, please. For example, in relation to the well-being or buen vivir for indigenous peoples in Peru, in the Andean mountains, they have this AILU system of summa causa, which constitutes the right living. And this philosophy of living is rooted in indigenous concepts and an understanding of an harmonious humanity relationship with nature. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge of the past is not the same as that the knowledge of indigenous peoples at present. The reality is that indigenous groups, they have in-depth knowledge of their natural and cultural environment. This knowledge is locally based, place-specific, is associated with each specific group, and has been transmitted over generations orally. And this has allowed indigenous peoples to manage successfully landscapes for centuries, and they continue to do so. So what I'm trying to say here is that despite the knowledge, the main characteristics has been preserved. As societies, they have also developed and evolved like other societies. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge is not important in political and scientific spheres. The truth is, and the reality is, that there have been a lot of endeavors to work alongside indigenous peoples and to integrate the knowledge in both spheres. And this started long ago, like 30 or 40 years ago. Both spheres are trying to create collaborations with indigenous peoples, exploring how their knowledge can complement scientific endeavors, and trying to bring and adopt a pluralistic approach when nature is valued. For example, current global frameworks have recognized that indigenous knowledge can play an important role to solve current environmental challenges and to reach and help us to reach global goals. Next slide, please. Another myth is that our indigenous knowledge continues to be overlooked in policy and scientific spheres. The reality is that despite and although collaborations between indigenous peoples and policy and scientific spheres are being developed with enriched ethical considerations if we compare with the past, this has not been comprehensive nor extend towards a more ethical implications that arise from this use and mobilizations of our indigenous knowledge. And I'm trying to bring here, for example, how those frameworks are not very good in respecting our epistemologies and ontologies, or essentially how we think as indigenous. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge is imprecise and difficult to understand. The reality is that our indigenous knowledge provides information, methods, and practices for the conservation and sustainable use of ecosystems and biodiversity. Then this knowledge can enrich our understanding of environmental change through ecological assessment and monitoring. And also it's important to remember that there are different groups around the world, and each group has their own protocol, methods, and approaches for data collection, for monitoring, etc. They have been able to accurately make measurements, observations, and predictions of the natural phenomena, Many of those phenomena have not even occurred today, like equinoxes, solstice, and they did so without the technology we have today. Thus emphasizing Western processes rather than recovering or using methods and approaches from indigenous peoples for scientific inquiry severely affects our ways of thinking. Next slide, please. And I bring an example. For example, the Mayas were very good in observing the behavior of the seasons, variation in the trajectories of the sun and the stars. They combined their knowledge and were able to record this knowledge in the construction of astronomical temples dedicated to their gods, including Kukulkan. And this, of course, requires deep knowledge of mathematics, geometry, acoustics, and astronomy. And the example I bring here is currently Mayan people in Yucatan, Mexico. They are still using and practicing the knowledge of the Xokkin, which is a Mayan method for weather forecast and predictions. And this involves a profound observation of nature, changing weather patterns, and consider bioindicators such as animals and plants. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge must be combined with Western science. The reality is that this commonly accepted idea can be false and lead to serious erosion of knowledge, since many indigenous groups have lost important amounts of knowledge and language because of this combination of different knowledge systems, and because this combination has been made without the ethical implications of respecting ontologies. And this is because perhaps those new ways to construct new knowledge are made or use instruments and tools that comes from Western methodologies and approaches. And this brings this romanticization or scientization of indigenous knowledge, and they try to manipulate indigenous knowledge to fit external agendas. Next slide, please. So why we are always emphasizing Western science frameworks if we have indigenous frameworks for scientific inquiry? For example, I bring the example of two eye seeing of the Mi'kmaq group, which embraces learning to see from one eye with the strengths of indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of mainstream knowledge, including Western science, for example. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge is intangible. The reality is not all elements of indigenous knowledge is intangible. This is because indigenous knowledge comprises four main foundational elements. So it consists on knowledge at local level about lands, animals, species, knowledge of social institutions. It includes practice and worldviews. And not all of those elements are intangible. The worldviews, yes, they are, but the other are countable and tangible. Next slide, please. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge cannot be included in Earth observations due to their poor credibility and accuracy of data collection. And the reality is that through intergenerational experience and observation, indigenous peoples were the first to observe and understand Earth processes, to notice and report on environmental change, and also have critical knowledge to adapt to it. They have long-standing stories of interaction with environment and can detect climate variability and its impact. This knowledge can inform understandings of environmental change impacts and adaptation policies. Next slide, please. And I bring the example of the Mayas. The Mayas were also very good at managing their water resources, and they continue to do so today. And during my PhD, I was able to bring this knowledge for groundwater monitoring. In this I was able to develop a research toolbox or toolkit in which indigenous knowledge was included, and this toolkit was developed with all different stakeholders working in the water sector as well, specialists, hydrologists. Next slide, please. And I just want to share some photos. This is one of the groundwater caves in Yucatan. They are called cenotes, and we have more than 3,000 cenotes all over the Yucatan state. Next slide, please. So to develop this toolkit, I was able to bring all the oral stories and to work with indigenous peoples all around the area. And this was very helpful for me to do the water balance model and to bring their perspective as well in the modeling part. Next slide, please. I performed, how do you say, we were able to do some visits with local members to detect the caves and to do underground exploration as well. Next slide, please. And with, together with the community, we were able also to describe the characteristics of the geology of the area, to find ancient and cultural material, pollution problems, to detect spots of or presence of biodiversity, among many other characteristics. And this was only possible with the support of indigenous members. Next slide, please. Another myth is that if indigenous knowledge is lost, nothing will happen because we have Western science. The truth is that as our humanity struggle to current environmental challenges, understand how policy science sector has interacted with indigenous peoples and their knowledge is relevant, since more erosion, even small, of our indigenous knowledge represents an existential threat to humanity. Next slide, please. And I will bring just a few final remarks. It is important to work with indigenous peoples and with local communities globally to make their knowledge available for nature conservation. But also it's important to protect our indigenous knowledge. And a real transformation will be possible only by restoring, revitalizing, and recovering our indigenous knowledge and preserve it intact. So because we have been losing language, traditions, practices. And finally, indigenous peoples' collective wisdom is and worldviews are much needed since they hold the future of our planet in their hands. And with that, I would like to finalize my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. It's very interesting and inspiring, I think, to see real different perspectives on what we are doing particularly in GEO. So I see this as a treasure. The questions and the comments we will do in the discussion part. I did, however, do a small poll while you were speaking, and I will share that with you now, just a small thing that we are doing. Let me share the results with you. And you see, we asked very simply, are you familiar with indigenous knowledge? And you have some who had discovered it through this dialogue, and some are unsure. So we have widened the knowledge to some people here. Thank you for participating also. So now we are going to move to the next speaker, to Titus again. And Titus, you are going to let us learn about indigenous knowledge for climate action as Samburu perspective. And I will be sharing your slides for that. So, right, Titus, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to appreciate Yolanda. That's a very good and very strong presentation. And looking at your presentation, it has a lot of similarities with what we do as Samburu tribe in terms of water management and also transfer of knowledge. So thank you very much. There is a lot that I learned from your presentation. Yeah, so coming to my presentation, so just go to the next slide. So maybe speaking about the Samburu tribe, we are based in northern part of Kenya, and we are semi-nomadic pastoralists. We mainly keep cattle, basically sheep, goats, and camel, and also so basically for our as a means of livelihood. So the reason why we keep moving from one point to another point, because the area is semi-arid land, and over the years also weather is not predictable. Rains are no longer coming at the right time, disorganized, not like before, because initially we know where grass is, when rain will come. So we used to move from one point to another point, knowing exactly what we do. But because of climate change, that one is also changing. Next slide. So looking at the knowledge, or maybe the indigenous knowledge, or how we look at weather, or maybe even predict weather changes or the climate change. Initially, we used to observe things like insects and birds' behavior, and also direction of movement. And the moment we see that, let's say, the insect and birds are moving towards the east, we know rain is coming to the east, and we move towards that. And also the presence of certain birds and certain insects, butterflies, for example, automatically tells that rain is near. Also looking at the plants, also leaves getting green, that's already an indication that rain is coming. So those are some of the traditional knowledge that we have. Also elders, in the evening, let's say when livestock are coming back home, they observe the fur, or maybe the texture of livestock fur. And if it's dull, that means the prediction is there's a bad omen, or let's say there's a bad droughts coming, or diseases are coming. And if the fur is clean and strongly standing, observation of some of the stars, you find elders early in the morning, or even late in the evening, still outside, trying to observe the certain stars, morning star, evening stars, just to make sure that maybe they can tell exactly what is happening. And that's why they can also sit down and talk with the young men or the youth, to explain exactly what does the star is maybe telling or describing. Sometimes also looking at the nature of clouds. So a lot of looking at the let's say the other objects. Also sometimes also the elders can tell. If an elder slaughters a goat or a cow for the family, he can also study the intestines, and out of that he can predict and tell what exactly will happen, whether bad time, drought or rain, the direction of exactly where the rain will rain. And even currently, you'll find that some NGOs are also trying to compare the same with the current science, to see whether the predictions are right, and it has been proved that it is right. So the indigenous knowledge is critical for our community, and also in comparison with other observation data. Next slide. So as a community, we're also trying to develop some applications that can be used on phones, or maybe on even on computers, to combine traditional knowledge and the current science, and even the scientific information. So we are trying to, we have developed one called Lapa app and Namnyaka app, though none of them has already been let's say is functional at the moment because of funding. But both of them are trying to combine traditional knowledge and other observation knowledge, so that maybe we see whether predictions are correct. Lapa app uses things like stars, livestock behavior, and people observing intestine to try and predict what will happen in future. Namnyak app is combining 3 symbols. You know, the 3 words are map. So this one uses 3 symbols combined together so that somebody can tell exactly where they are, and also assist the local government maybe to locate where the community are, and where when the disaster strikes, then they can be able to assist or maybe locate where the community are. So the Lopa app and Namnyak app is the application that we are trying to develop to combine the traditional knowledge and science, and also global Earth observation to get exactly what is needed. Next slide. We, as a community or as a tribe, we are also faced with a lot of challenges. Mostly one of them being like internet connection. You'll find that most of the areas that we live has no internet connection, or we can't access to climate data. The other one is a lack of funding for indigenous-led projects. As I mentioned, we have the Lopa app and Namnyak app. So because of funding, it has not picked up, or maybe it has not been finalized. That's another challenge that we are facing as a community. The other one is limited or lack of relevant government services. Most of the areas that the indigenous communities live sometimes are considered hard to reach areas that cannot be reached by government services. Areas cannot be reached by development. Access roads are not available. Internet is not available. So basically, even if a government officer is transferred, it's not willing to be transferred to that point. So that's another challenge that we face, and also indigenous knowledge not taken seriously. For example, if I mentioned that elders, if the slaughter goes, they observe the intestines to determine the future, then you'll find that most of the developed world cannot believe on that. If let's say they sit in the evening and observe the stars, most of the Western world cannot, let's say, even understand that that's a reality, or even movement of wildlife, or even birds and insects. So indigenous knowledge not being taken seriously is also another challenge that we are facing as a tribe. Next slide. Although we have those challenges, we have a lot of opportunities to drive the impact. One of it is investing in communication, infrastructure, and public service. That means investing in communication within the local indigenous communities, not necessarily within the Samburu, but across the world, so that they will be able to communicate what they want to the world. Then funding or fund indigenous-led projects and provide tailored training. We know Earth observation data is very critical, is very important. But how do we make sure that the indigenous communities or people are able to interpret that data? Is through trainings. So, and unless they are trained on a local way, or maybe on a culturally relevant way, then they can't even utilize the data. The other one is also include indigenous knowledge in climate assessment. If you are doing that, let's try to include the indigenous knowledge, as Yolanda has been putting across what they do and what we do, what other people are doing across, indigenous communities are doing across the world. How do we make sure that that knowledge is also included in climate assessment? I'd forget for indigenous data sovereignty. We know most of the data from indigenous communities. Some of them are not even, the feedback are not given to the communities or indigenous communities. So how do we make even sure that the data that is collected within the indigenous people, how making sure they own the process, they own the data, and even use the data themselves. Next slide. Yeah, then as indigenous communities, we are also trying to Indigenous Alliance. We have a scheduled Indigenous Water Summit in October 25th, 27, which is supported by US GEO, and will provide a platform for indigenous communities and scientists, also plus political policymakers and youth to come together and explore the vital role of water in climate resilience. GEO Indigenous Water Summit is also an essential part of our ongoing efforts, and will build on the GEO Indigenous Summit 2020 that brought together over 1,000 people. So we also welcome you on that, and if you're interested, possibly to join on that, you can also scan on that code, the code on the screen, to get more information and also register for that. So with that, I say thank you for listening, and thank you for GEO for giving us this opportunity to, as indigenous communities, to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Titus. Again, very interesting, and it never stops amazing me the different perspectives that we around the Earth possess. It's super interesting. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was the last slide you had, Titus.
Asheoleng is a thank you in Samburu tribe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
thank you. I will stop sharing this and go back to the screen. Again, we will I see so many things that will be interesting to discuss in the discussion part, but before we go there, I would like to introduce to you the next speaker, and that will be Alejandro. Let me see, I will introduce you, Alejandro. And I have a bit of, I should not complain about the sun, but I have no way of protecting my eyes against it, so I'm sorry. Let me see here, Alejandro, I will introduce you. We are going back to the other side, to another continent again, to Mexico, or actually Canada now. Alejandro Mayoral Baños is an activist and academic with a passion for bridging the worlds between indigenous peoples and digital technologies. So this is a good fit with the two first presentations, I think, that you bring, and having your expertise on bringing these two worlds together. And I will just leave these slides for you to, and you can talk a little bit about yourself also, Alejandro. I'm very happy to give you the floor.
Thank you, Bente. Oh, thank you everyone for being here today. Let me just share my screen. I'm very excited, and because I know that we have very limited time, so I'll try to be brief because I want also the discussion to happen. But why I'm here with all of you today, I was part with Diana Mastrasi, that is part of the group, the GEO Alliance, in the Adaptation Week of the Climate Change Forum. And why we were there, because actually there is a big trend right now that artificial intelligence is gonna save us from climate change. But there is a big problem about that, of course. And ironically, the same people that are claiming that we are gonna solve the climate change issues with artificial intelligence, they are trying to put indigenous knowledge in the center. So there is a big contradiction bringing artificial intelligence and indigenous knowledge without acknowledging several things that a lot of all the other speakers already address. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, Tlena Kinki Wanikan Alejandro. Hello, my name is Alejandro. I just spoke in the Totonac language that is spoken in the eastern part of Mexico. And I had the privilege that I had a computer science background in my bachelor's, and then I had the opportunity to do a master's and a PhD in indigenous studies and in communication and cultural studies. So my focus is how indigenous knowledge can actually design digital tech. And why is that important? Because now the effects on the environment of digital tech is huge, is very, very significant. As I always talk, indigenous technologies, and I think the other speakers brought a lot of other examples, have been around us for a long period of time. Commonly, when we talk about technology, we think about computers, we think about solar panels, and we think about engineers working in an environment like the ones in the screen. But indigenous technologies have been around for a long period of time, for millennia. And of course, it looks completely different of what Western science looks at, how it looks at technology, how actually technology is perceived. Just the example that I'm bringing from the region that I'm originally is the three sisters, the corn, the beans, and the squash. So how it's important to put these three crops together in order to grow together. And they are the three sisters. The corn is the older sister, the beans is the middle sister, and the squash is the youngest sister. But all of them, they have a purpose, and they need to grow together. And this is a technology that has passed over generations. Also, in the territory that I am right now, in Toronto, in Canada, we have the motives. Actually, this technology is from the west part of Canada, the Tla'amin Nation from British Columbia, and how they are using the patterns in the basket to do a lot of math calculations. What are we looking at here? What is this that you are looking here? Well, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just gonna give you the answer. Is the internet. So I just want to show you that like the internet, digital technologies are very disruptive with the environment. And this picture is a visual example of that. All these cables are across the world and are connecting us. Today, we are using one of these cables, many of these actually cables, these wires, in order to be connected to this meeting. So how actually digital tech is affecting the environment. Of course, the resources, how many indigenous communities are being exploited around the world in order to get all the minerals needed in order to have the computers that we are running today and all the devices that we are using for digital tech. So we cannot ignore digital tech, and we cannot say that they are landless. Actually, what we are always claiming is that digital tech has a lot of impact in the environment, and actually they have a lot of land within the digital space. We have these 5 big players that we all know, we all use, we are part of, also we are users of them. It's very difficult to get out of them, just because if we get out of them, we are excluded. If you try to get out from these 5 biggest companies, the 5 biggest companies of all times, by the way, there haven't been in all times companies as big as this ones. And they continue growing. And of course, with expansion artificial intelligence, we are like, there are many big problems. Surveillance, the water crisis. Of course, in Kenya, a lot of workers were exploited to create ChatGPT. Now that we use ChatGPT, we were exploiting workers in Kenya. The recognition that Amazon has been pitching across the world in order to, with Amazon Web Services, and how this is affecting the environment and how actually affects us as individuals and communities. So a lot of the historical colonization that we experienced in the past, now we are suffering that with data colonization. And this is not just affecting indigenous peoples, this is affecting everyone. Now we have the data harvesting. Now we can go to your mobile device and we can extract the data from it. And I can start profiting from your data. I can start surveilling yourself. And of course, there are legislation that can protect you. But at the end of the day, if you click accept the terms and conditions, I can start surveilling you. And there is a centralization of power. Now, of course, basically, the US and China have a lot of centralization of power. And one thing that I forgot to mention, these companies, they have more power than national states. They can decide about elections. Next year, 2024, there are going to be 70 elections across the world. And these companies are going to have a big decision on what is going to happen in those elections. So you can see the impact that this can have in the world. And of course, about climate change and policymaking. And now, how are indigenous technologies getting into this? Well, precisely because one thing about indigenous technologies is indigenous technologies not just about individual profit. It includes a lot of traditional knowledge and a lot of ways of thinking and common values that are encrusted into the technology. We saw several examples with other speakers. Right now, I'm bringing, for example, the TP. The Cree TP, for example, in order to raise the TP, you need to have a lot of technical and mathematical knowledge. But not only that, also the cultural and community values need to be encrusted when you are raising a TP. So what about if we start thinking about digital tech in the way that indigenous technologies were created, were formed? So what we did in our organization, and I did throughout my PhD, was what about if we create digital tech, we create a digital application using the protocols of the TP, not just as a way to indigenize the technology, but as a way to bring the communal values and the environmental values into digital tech, and how we need to start thinking about indigenous data sovereignty, how it's important to start thinking about how we are using these devices in order to address the environmental problem. And of course, starting from community in a real TP, and understanding what are the big problems of raising a TP and the complexities of it. I just want to go further because I know that we have limited time. I have many things to share about this, but I want to focus in indigenous data sovereignty and why it's so important about indigenous data sovereignty. Something that, and of course now is very popular because, ironically, because Facebook made indigenous data sovereignty important. Cambridge Analytica made people aware of the privacy issues. Oh, my data is important. So now we need to protect our data. And now that there is a big protection of our data, now we are very, very aware of our privacy. With indigenous data sovereignty, actually, there has been a big movement in academia. However, of course, indigenous data sovereignty comes even back before even digital tech. Something that has happened to a lot of our indigenous and our indigenous communities is that the data has been extracted historically. A lot of people outside went to the communities to start extracting the data, extracting the stories, extracting the knowledge. And this has been passing for centuries. Now, of course, with digital tech and with social media, this has been extrapolated. And of course, now talking about data sovereignty, and of course, data sovereignty was without indigenous, just data sovereignty was started in Europe because, of course, being scared of the power of the US. And now how the European countries were actually very concerned about data sovereignty. But when we talk about indigenous data sovereignty, there are a lot of things to consider. There are a lot of communal values to be considered. That, of course, and I think that in the GEO Alliance, this is part of what we are looking at. It's not just about being open that is based on the fair values, that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, but also to have the care values, collective benefit, authority of control, responsibility, and ethics. That commonly, these level of commitment, and of course, this level in the policy making creates a lot of problems or creates a lot of issues with a lot of policymakers, because this gives back the power to the communities to decide about their data. And this creates, of course, complexities about how the technology needs to be designed, because this provides people the opportunity to delete their data in order to control what they are sharing with the creator of the technology. I don't have more time to go in depth about the care principles, but I just want to give just one last thing. And I think this is my final reflection. Now about the problem with artificial intelligence. If we don't start thinking about indigenous data sovereignty, and we don't start thinking how we're encrusting this, and even that we are working in the environmental sphere, is artificial intelligence is advancing so fast. And how it's advancing so fast is actually collecting data. How it works, it collects a lot of massive data. And ironically now, even here in Canada, there have been some examples where elders were asking artificial intelligence about the traditional knowledge, about all these stories. And now artificial intelligence platforms have the knowledge, and they are using the knowledge. And so there are a lot of concerns, because in order for that artificial intelligence to know that information, there was a lot of extraction of data. So that's why it's so important to bring this, not just for indigenous in indigenous issues. I would say that this is important overall, but I truly believe that indigenous knowledge can bring some of the solutions for all these problems. So I'm gonna leave it like just there, because I know that we have very limited time, but there is a lot to discuss about it. Thank you so much, Pashka Katsini.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And you brought up many different interesting challenges. And before we are now entering to the discussion part, I can just I will try to find the recording of when we had James here to talk about the care principles. So the last year dialogue series, we were actually comparing the GEO, data sharing and data management principles, with FAIR, care, and trust. So we do, and what we found, by the way, is that these principles are complementing each other. So we have brought, Alejandro, we have brought this care principles into the discussions that we are having in GEO already, but it's just a start. So, but I just wanted to tell you that. And then we have a recording. So for those who want to go deeper that you didn't have time to go into today, we do have a recording of the introduction of the care principles also. Now, before I give the floor to ready for discussion, I will end the poll that I published while you were speaking, Alejandro, and that was this one. I was asking, can indigenous and modern technology be combined? And the opinion is yes, but it needs substantial standardization work at many levels, I guess. Yes, it should be straightforward, and some are not sure, but all believe that there's, there's a potential there. Thank you for participating in this. Now, yes, the discussion. There are many things to discuss here. I have many questions I would like to ask all of you to reflect on myself. But I think we can do what Marie-Françoise, thank you very much for being engaged from where you are. And I think we can start. I don't know, she can probably not ask the questions, but before I do that, I see Bob, you have raised your hand. Bob, you have the floor first, being here with the raised hand.
Thank you very much. And my internet's acting up a little bit today, so if I get problems, I'm just going to reduce my video here. But I really appreciate all of the different speakers' presentations today. They were very informative, and I think that
you're breaking up, so maybe turn off your camera then, Bob.
Recognizing that indigenous knowledge has value and that we can continue to learn from indigenous knowledge, but at the okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a problem today. Recognizing that we have value and we can continue getting value from indigenous knowledge, that is, the indigenous communities can gain from indigenous knowledge, but others might be able to improve their own understanding through indigenous knowledge. I think we need to be very careful, though, that we're not taking this indigenous knowledge in a way that would harm the indigenous communities from which it originated. And so I'm just wondering about the methodologies that we might consider when thinking about how we might be able to utilize indigenous knowledge in conjunction with other knowledge, such as science, etc., scholarship, and help to move forward in terms of the breadth of knowledge that is available to society today.
Yes, Bob. So maybe this is interesting for all three
So yeah,
speakers.
any
Yes.
speakers who might reflect on that, please do so.
Yes, I was going to say that maybe because the speakers represent different perspectives also on indigenous. So maybe a quick comment to Bob's questions from all three of you. Titus, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you, and I totally agree with Bob that we need to make sure that we protect the indigenous knowledge, and that's why I mentioned that indigenous data sovereignty is very important, and also making sure that we don't lose that. Yeah, so I totally agree. Indigenous people need to put some mechanism to ensure that it's not duplicated, it's not maybe lost in a way or diluted in a way. But I still believe that combining the indigenous knowledge in such a way with science, or even let's say with maybe knowledge from scientists is also critical. So I agree. It is very important to protect it.
Yes, thank you. And then Yolanda.
Thank you, Lilia. Well, my comment is that I think I mentioned during my presentation is that the indigenous peoples are quite different. They share some characteristics, and when protecting or preserving their indigenous knowledge, it is important to consider each indigenous protocol. So it's not the same the knowledge of people living in the Arctic as the Mayas living in the south of Mexico. But the most important thing is that to support communities to recover their knowledge, we have been lost to several processes in human history. And one way to do this is by supporting the preservation of languages, not to impose preconceptions on indigenous people's minds, and to respect their protocols and try to understand, even though that indigenous knowledge for scientists is something that has not doesn't have any sense at all. When we talk about worldviews or ceremonies, it's something like esoteric for the majority of the people, but it is not. It's a different way of knowing things and a different practices. And the importance of this knowledge is that it's not only to preserve it is not going to be only for the benefit of indigenous peoples, but also for the benefit of humanity, because we have been named the stewards of the planet. We take care of a lot of important ecosystems, etc. So I think the three important aspects of indigenous knowledge is to recover, restore, and revitalize with the respect of indigenous protocols.
Oh, thank you very much. Alejandro, your perspectives?
Yes, I think it's very important that indigenous knowledge is also evolving, and of course it's also adapting to the new challenges. A lot of course, for example, going back to the example that I use, the TP today looks completely different than how the TPs were looking like 100 years ago. So what does that mean? That also I think in the combination of Western knowledge with indigenous knowledge, with the two I seeing that actually Yolanda mentioned, that's as a good framework, we need to consider just that indigenous knowledge is not static, is also something that is gonna be continuously moving, but of course with the consultation and the understanding of the communities.
Yes.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Titus, Yolanda, and Alejandro.
Excellent. So taking up on this sovereignty. So in when we are talking about data management, at least we are talking about provenance. And I'm wondering, so if you talk about sovereignty, and you are a part of, when you are a part of the GEO organization, you actually agreed that you will share data with minimum restrictions and minimum time delay. So how is that? And this is something that I think that we should discuss, because if you mean sovereignty is something that, well, you own, we say that the data providers or knowledge providers are the owners. So this should be straightforward. That also goes for indigenous knowledge and indigenous data, whatever you say. But I'm wondering how you are thinking about this sovereignty. How I understand the based on experience and the reluctance in some respects to share, because you are afraid of being exploited. And I think, Alejandro, you had a great illustration that all of us, in a sense, can be regarded as being exploited today by these big companies, right? It's like, how do we handle that? It's of course a different situation to you, but still it's the same. It's how do we share and yet have maintain our ownership? Is ownership and sovereignty? Can you share some thoughts on that? That would be interesting. Being open and sovereignty.
Bente, may I
Yes.
spin first, because I need to jump to my next meeting. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. But I think that's a great question. I think, and I was discussing with several indigenous activists and allies in June about this. Sovereignty has a lot of meanings, and especially, for example, there are communities that they are nations. They have their own sovereignty as such. So yes, you can take about control, but for example, in Latin America, you cannot talk about sovereignty. Sometimes actually communities talk about autonomy, and how what is the difference between autonomy and sovereignty? There are several political implications on that, and how actually the legislation can support those differences. And I think, and also I'm gonna give you another example. The Inuit in the north, they don't have the concept of ownership. So, for example, when you talk about ownership of data with Inuit, with the Inuit, there is no conception as such. So it's also very important, but there is the concept of sovereignty, of course. So how that looks like, I think it goes back to the nation, or to the community. How are they understanding the control of the information? How they are understanding, how they are benefiting from the information. And every community will have different perspectives. Of course, this creates complexities, but I think that is why having these discussions are so important.
Thank you. So,
and I'm sorry, I need to jump.
You need to jump. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Stay in the community, Alejandro.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, both you, Titus, and Yolanda, you might have some perspectives to share on this, this sovereignty. It's contextual, as I think we, Alejandro ended up with. But your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to me, it's just like I own the data; it's mine. Sometimes even organizations or even big companies can develop the tools to acquire the data. But by the end of the day, the information and even the data belongs to the community. So how it's being used and who it will benefit sometimes is at the mercy of the big company or the organization. And that's why people keep saying that this data sovereignty is very important, and the need of making sure that they use this consultation, and even let's say making the more advanced, or even changing it. There is need for the indigenous, maybe the data owners, or even the community need to be consulted, and even the approval should come from them. I know there is that fear of unknown, and even people are doubting where maybe the use of the data. And again, it's very important that the communities understand the benefit even before the tool is developed, or even before the data is, let's say, made public. Yeah, so I think it's just the purpose of ownership, and even making the local community. Sometimes communities can be illiterate; they can't read, they can't write. But how do you make sure that they understand that the data collected is theirs, and they have the responsibility of making a decision on how that one can benefit them, and even benefit their neighbors, or even the whole world. Yeah, so basically that ownership and consultation, and allowing the community to participate in decision making.
Yeah, this is actually has some similarity with the discussions on citizen science as well. To motivate people to share, it's important for them to know how they benefit from them, or who is benefiting, because people can be altruistic and want to share also. But yeah, so there are some similarities. Yolanda, your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think it's important to distinguish between knowledge, because knowledge can be something specific, or knowledge can be seen as a process. And for example, science generates knowledge through the use of methods and analytical techniques, and you will get different types of data. And I think this is important because, as Alejandro mentioned, knowledge is not static, has evolved, and this is true. But the knowledge, we are talking about the specific knowledge about the functioning of the planet, and not about, Alejandro talked about the arts and the crafts and everything, but the knowledge about understanding natural processes and Earth system dynamics is an important, different knowledge that we need to deal in Earth observations. And in relation to this aspect of ownership and accountability and all these important aspects, is I will just give an example. So what will happen, imagine that you are ill and you visit a doctor. The doctor gets data from you. Who will be the owner of the data? You or the doctor? Is this dichotomy? Could be the doctor because he's in a hospital, but the reality is that data does not belong to any of the two sides. It's data that is collected to understand processes, and ownership belongs to the people that has been there for centuries and longer generations to understand and to bring this knowledge to the table. So I think it's really a very complex issue, who owns what. But of course, if we have communities living there since times immemorial, the data should belong to them, because they provide more information than current Western science approaches.
Yes, and then yeah, so who belongs to the data? I come from the countryside. I come from Norway. We are very close to nature in general, and some of the things, of course not all, but some of the things I recognize that we, in the small community where I grew up, we have phenology data, for instance, collectively, and we actively, as a community, we discuss. So it's observations and knowledge combined. It's data and knowledge that are linked in a way, and it's sort of a common. So I think I understand this concept that the community as a large has a bigger body of knowledge than the individuals, also through time, right? Through generations. And it's both tangible and intangible in the same time, at the same time. And so this is I think this is a commonalities that might then be used to find a way of respectfully sharing to the, to the planet's good, right? But I see, I see so many, with this sovereignty. I saw the paradox, if you like, that in GEO we have this open data sharing and open knowledge sharing, but and then the focus, and I totally understand it, like, because it's the preservation of those indigenous groups or communities as well. I mean, how do you preserve that? And at the same time, so how to handle that sovereignty and yet be able to share? It's I think we still can explore how to do that. But there's of course always the political issues and so on in addition. Yeah. Let me see if I have any more comments here. So Marie-Françoise, thank you very much for all your comments. The data, maybe I should go very quickly through it. Unless I see some hands raising, please do ask for the floor, speakers and attendees alike. Yes, we have something called data spaces now, in Europe. And Marie-Françoise is here, the issue of data sovereignty as at the core at the concept of data spaces, and we can expect progress on the management of sovereignty in the future. Now, we were discussing this in a meeting earlier this week, actually, on the sovereignty in data spaces actually come from companies wanting to exclude other partners. So having sovereignty of the data sharing in a closed context. But this is not what sovereignty means to you for the indigenous community, is it?
Are you asking to?
Yeah, I'm asking, yeah.
Well, of course not.
No.
Because as you mentioned, it's a paradox that it is not easy to solve, because we are dealing with huge amounts of data, so it's not a single thing. So it's sometimes uncontrollable and difficult to measure as well. So for me, it's really something which is those big companies are not working towards the inclusion of other knowledge systems, and they really want to control, because information is power. And probably this information should or can be used for other purposes. We don't know, but the truth is that it's not happening.
Yeah. So it looks like if it's not anything else here, I think it's natural to conclude. And the fact that we have in the GEO Open Knowledge Statement this paragraph or this principle on diversity of knowledge, where we explicitly mention and address indigenous groups, I think that's a good starting point to have in the GEO community a discussion on how this can be implemented. I don't know if you see this as a way to go forward, the GEO Indigenous Alliance, to work around this particular principle. Maybe it might be a good starting point.
I wanted to say, well, I think indigenous peoples deserve a seat on the table of the negotiations and the decision-making processes, because they have been living here for centuries, and everything that deals with the protection, understanding, and monitoring of Earth system processes also, we need to include them. And I think we are in a good track, but still far from the place that we deserve as the caretakers of the planet. But I'm happy that we are going there. Maybe we are not going to see that in the future, but our generations will see.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Titus, do you have a final comment before we close?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Yolanda. It's very important that indigenous communities are consulted and also be on the table whenever things are being discussed, and especially in terms of climate change and other the impact mostly goes to them, having in mind that they are marginalized over the years. And I'm sure it's not only in Africa, but across other continents. So I think it's high time that maybe they are given space in terms of not necessarily making decisions if that's not the case, but just making sure that they also give out their thinking on how best data can be utilized, or even how technology can benefit them. So 100% I agree with what she said.
Excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you, Titus, Yolanda, and Alejandro, for your very valuable input. I choose to see this as a start of a process of exchange of knowledge and experience within the framework of GEO, and just the start. And let's hope that we can continue to address this. The next address and move on finding solutions on how to best implement our ideas. The next dialogue will be a possibility to bring in the indigenous perspective. We are going to talk about the goals, how we can move towards open knowledge in GEO, and we are inviting representatives from all the 4 GEO regions, and the indigenous people are represented in all 4 regions. So I think this might be an opportunity for representatives from the Indigenous People Alliance to take part in that dialogue, which will take place on the 12th of October. And James has already from what's his name, Rattling Leaf Senior. He has been talking about the CARE principles earlier, and he was mentioning that capacity development is one of the key words, the key activities. Both, I mean, for indigenous people to make use of modern technology, just as much as for us to learn to understand the indigenous knowledge. So on the 19th of October, that will be the final dialogue for this year, which will be much more of a training. So we have some tools that can be useful. So this is an offer of capacity development also, and I mention it now for the indigenous groups, that this is also, of course, open to everybody, including the GEO Indigenous Alliance members. So with that, wonderful presentations. This will be made available on the GEO Knowledge Hub, and we are looking forward to see both you and several others from the GEO Indigenous Alliance in future dialogues. Thank you so much.